Earth, a unique planet, restless and dynamic. Continents shift and clash. Volcanoes erupt. Glaciers grow and recede. Titanic forces that are constantly at work, leaving a trail of geological mysteries behind. One of these mysteries is centered here, in the Grand Canyon in Arizona. Close to 1 billion tons of rock have been carved out of the ground. The canyon left behind could hold all the river water on Earth and still be less than half full. For more than a century, scientists have debated how and when this vast chasm was created. And now, geologists are uncovering fresh evidence of how the Grand Canyon fits into the ever-evolving story of how the Earth was made. The Grand Canyon, one of America's most spectacular natural wonders. A canyon 18 miles across at its widest point, 277 miles long, and more than 1 mile deep. It is so vast that it can even be seen from space. Although Hell's Canyon in Idaho is almost half a mile deeper, and Australia's Capertee Valley is nearly 1 mile wider, the Grand Canyon remains the most famous of them all. And it also holds one of geology's greatest mysteries. Just how did the Colorado River, only 1/10 the size of the Mississippi, form such a large canyon? The answer has eluded scientists for more than a century, because many of the clues they normally rely on have been swept away by the river's water over millions of years, or buried by landslides, or destroyed by volcanoes.
It seems like we should understand perfectly how the Grand Canyon formed. The problem is we've lost a tremendous amount of evidence. It's like a murder mystery where most of the evidence is lost. And so the best we can do is piece together the evidence that we have.
Even so, slowly but surely, this geological icon is giving up its most ancient secrets. The canyon's richly colored layers offer scientists one of the most complete geological records on Earth.
The first concept you have to get your mind around as you're thinking about the Grand Canyon is that the stories told by the rocks are exceedingly old, millions and billions of years.
Karlstrom and his team are setting out on a grueling geology field trip along the Colorado River. It won't be an easy ride, because this 1,450-mile-long river packs a punch. More than 800 million gallons of water can flow down the Colorado every hour. More water every second than the average U.S. household uses in a year. Karlstrom is investigating the ancient history of the land that was here before the Grand Canyon even existed. And for that, he needs to identify its oldest rocks. He is following in the footsteps of pioneer explorer John Wesley Powell. In 1869, he was the first man to successfully ride the Colorado through the entire length of the canyon.
All of us who work in the canyon as scientists admire John Wesley Powell immensely for his pioneer and scientific exploration of the Grand Canyon. And the questions that he framed are still questions that we work on today.
One of Powell's discoveries was these intimidating black rocks at the very base of the canyon.
Well, we're deep in the Grand Canyon, right by the Colorado River. You can see these spectacular black rocks. Actually, John Wesley Powell called them ugly black rocks, because for him, these hard rocks made bad rapids, and that was harder on his trip. But for those of us who are interested in the early history of Grand Canyon, these rocks are the bonanza.
Powell had no way of dating these rocks, now identified as Vishnu schist. All he could conclude from their appearance was that they had once been molten, deep underground. But Karlstrom has an advantage: modern instruments that can accurately date the rocks by measuring radioactive decay. And the first step in figuring out what happened here in the ancient past is to record when these rocks were created.
These rocks are about 1.7 billion years old. It's less than half of the age of the Earth. So we have a great story here in the Grand Canyon of the last almost 2 billion years of Earth history.
But Karlstrom needs more information. And these ugly black rocks hold another crucial clue to what this land looked like before the canyon was cut. They can tell him not only when they were formed, but also precisely how deep in the Earth's crust they were made. These tiny stones, embedded throughout the ancient boulders, are literally jewels. Garnets that only form under immense pressure. The sort of pressure that's found when layers are crushed by the weight of millions of tons of rock on top of them.
The silver bullet clue is the garnet.
These garnets are the key to understanding the amount of rock above us.
By analyzing the chemical structure of the garnet, in particular its calcium content, investigators can determine how much weight of rock was crushing down upon it at the moment it was made.
In simple terms, if you analyze the garnet and you see higher calcium content of the garnet, it means you're deeper into a mountain belt, more rocks above you. So we take these garnets back to the laboratory, we cut a very thin section, we put them under an electron microprobe, and the scientific result after this analysis is that we were 6 miles deep beneath the surface of the peaks, which were above us, and that's a long ways.
So, nearly 2 billion years ago, before the canyon evolved, ancient mountains 6 miles above sea level stood here, towering peaks as high as the modern Himalayas. Over the next 500 million years, these mountains were worn away by the relentless forces of erosion. Over millennia, the freezing and thawing of ice cracked open the rock of the mountain slopes. Wind and water carried the rock debris down towards the oceans, leaving behind a flat and featureless plain with no sign at all of a canyon.
Geologists learned to visualize the way that this place looked in the past. Knowing how to read the texture of the rock, the kind of rock it is, the fossils that are in it, geologists can, it's like a detective story. You can uncover what this place looked like billions of years ago.
This is now desert country, more than 300 miles inland. And yet, these shells, encased in solid rocks, are ocean fossils.
In this one cliff, you can find fossil shells that look like you'd pick up on the seashore today. They die, they fall to the bottom of the seafloor, and they get trapped and die in the mud at the bottom of the ocean at the time that they're being deposited.
Shells like these come from shallow tropical waters, an inland sea that first arrived here 500 million years ago and covered the flat, low-lying plain. But that did not happen just once. Many different layers in the walls of the Grand Canyon tell Karlstrom that over hundreds of millions of years, this land has been submerged by the sea, not just once, but at least 8 times. The last time this part of Arizona was under the sea was around 80 million years ago.
As we go higher in the layers in the Grand Canyon, we have different age seas which are depositing different kinds of rocks, different environments, different fossils that live at the different times. This chapter of seas coming in and seas going out
is itself hundreds of millions of years.
Each sea deposited different types of material that hardened to become solid rock. Some sediment was sand that became buff-colored sandstone. Some was mud that hardened into darker shale, while the calcified remains of marine organisms were crushed into light-colored limestone. And yet, the dominant color is red. That comes from iron, locked within all the rocks. Over millions of years, the iron rusts into a distinctive red hue. For the geology detectives, descending into the Grand Canyon is like traveling back in time. The calcium content inside garnet gemstones reveals that nearly 2 billion years ago, mountains the size of Mount Everest stood where the Grand Canyon is now. Sea fossils exposed in the cliffs show that as late as 500 million years ago, the land was the muddy bottom of an ancient inland sea. The next puzzle for geologists is uncovering which awesome forces transformed that unremarkable flat land into this breathtaking natural wonder of the world. From 1.7 billion years ago to 70 million years ago, the landscape of western Arizona has undergone a series of extraordinary changes. Ancient mountains have given way to prehistoric seas, which have withdrawn to reveal a low-lying flat plain stretching as far as the eye can see. The magnificent gorge of the Grand Canyon does not yet exist. But over the next 20 million years, this landscape was to undergo immense changes that would create a unique high plateau and set the scene for the formation of the canyon. Ancient fossils of sea animals tell geologists that this land was once under the waves of an inland ocean. But that leads to yet another mystery. The investigation needs to figure out why these undersea rocks are now high in the air, thousands of feet above sea level.
It's surprising to go up a mile above sea level and you find a clamshell or what looks like a clamshell. And you say, that's what I see when I go down to the ocean. So why is it here a mile above sea level?
It's clear that this region underwent a type of geological disturbance that pushed up the entire seabed. Geologists discovered in the 1960s that collisions between separate plates of the Earth's crust could force land up into the air. It happens all over the globe and usually deforms the land into tilted mountain ranges. But this Arizona uplift was unique.
After all the flat layers are deposited at sea level, there was a major uplift event called the Laramide orogeny, which lifted these rocks without tilting them, still flat, lifted them up to high elevation.
Because the land rose straight up, like being in an elevator, it formed a high, smooth plateau. The sea that had been there drained back toward the northeast. But as of yet, there was no Grand Canyon. The Colorado River, the force that cut the canyon from the rock, had yet to arrive.
Geologists from the very early days, from the late 1800s, are quite comfortable with the knowledge that the Colorado River has carved the Grand Canyon.
The high plateau was surrounded by even higher mountain ranges. New rivers began flowing from the mountains out across the plateau. It's essential for the investigation to establish when the Colorado River in particular arrived, because only then could it begin to carve the canyon. Until a few decades ago, some investigators thought this ancient riverbed, called Hindu Canyon, provided the answer. they believed that Hindu Canyon's creation, 50 million years ago, marked the arrival of the Colorado River and the beginnings of the Grand Canyon. But in 1969, the discovery of these pebbles turned everything that geologists thought they knew about the canyon on its head.
It turns out that to explain how the Grand Canyon got there is very much more complex than people thought. So the early geologists thought it was simple, but now we realize there's a lot more to the story, and it's kind of a detective story. You start out with a few clues, and you put the clues together, and then finally you get the satisfaction of saying, well, you know, I figured this out before anybody else did.
Figuring it out before anyone else was just what Young did in 1969 when he was a 24-year-old geology graduate student at Washington University. His professors sent him to investigate Hindu Canyon. But when Young arrived at the dusty riverbed, he discovered that it had nothing to do with the Colorado or the Grand Canyon itself. His discovery flew in the face of all the established geological theories and revolutionized thinking about the canyon's history. The evidence Young had uncovered was the alignment of pebbles in the bed of the river.
If you look at these pebbles, you can see that the pebbles are flowing, or the pebbles are oriented in this direction, which is a stable direction for water flowing to my right. If the pebbles had been oriented this way, the water would have flipped them over. So when we find pebbles that are oriented this way, that tells us that the water was flowing to my right.
It is a crucial clue. The Colorado River could never have flowed to Young's right. It has always run in the opposite direction, towards the Pacific Ocean. The river here, 50 million years ago, was not the Colorado, and it did not cut the Grand Canyon. Young's findings meant scientists had to rethink all their ideas about when the Colorado had arrived on the plateau and about the age of the canyon. They started examining evidence from another, less ancient site. This is Muddy Creek, near Lake Mead, Arizona, just a few miles downstream from where the Colorado River exits the Grand Canyon today. The underlying rocks prove that this was once the site of a vast freshwater lake.
The upper part of the Muddy Creek Formation is this nice limestone which formed in a freshwater lake. The water would have been very clean. There would have been lots of plants and animals living in the water, and as they sank to the bottom, the calcium carbonate in their shells would form this limestone, which is typically what forms a limestone rock.
The limestone is the calcified remains of the creatures that once lived in this lake. Then, 5.5 million years ago, the animals all disappeared. There were no shells to make fresh limestone. The only explanation is that the animals died 5.5 million years ago because that was the date when the Colorado River arrived here. The river would have been carrying masses of dirt and rock sediment from the fledgling Grand Canyon.
The water would have been too muddy and dirty, and limestone does not form in dirty, silty, muddy water. It's just incompatible. The animals and plants that live in such a lake can't exist if there's a lot of silt and mud in the water.
So, the muddy death of the lake gave geologists a confirmed date for when the Colorado arrived in Arizona and commenced its excavations. The Grand Canyon was born a mere 5.5 million years ago. The investigation has reached a significant milestone. It has discovered the age of the canyon. The angles at which pebbles lie in ancient riverbeds reveal that the Grand Canyon is far younger than geologists had previously ever suspected. The limestone discovered at Muddy Creek reveals the date that the Colorado River arrived on the plateau and the true age of the canyon, 5.5 million years old. Now geologists had a new mystery to solve, discovering why the Colorado River took the path it did some 5.5 million years ago, and why it carved a canyon of such remarkable dimensions. The investigation into the history of the Grand Canyon has uncovered a 1.7 billion year old landscape that has evolved from ancient mountains through to the Colorado Plateau. 5.5 million years ago, the Colorado River began carving out the Grand Canyon from this plateau. The question scientists now had to answer was what happened at that time to cause the river to dig deep and carve out the canyon. It is a debate that has been going on for more than a century, and which continues today.
I got interested in the Grand Canyon when I went to school and started studying, and I heard about the different ideas associated with the Grand Canyon and was just blown away when I found out we did not understand how the Grand Canyon formed. Something as iconic as the Grand Canyon wasn't understood, just seemed crazy to me, and so basically decided to dedicate a large portion of my life to trying to figure it out.
One theory is that several ancient rivers merged, and their combined cutting power started digging out the canyon. Another assumes that the river cut down into the plateau as the land uplifted around it. But John Douglas has his own theory, one that has gained respect among many leading geologists since he first published his ideas in 2000. What Douglas calls his spillover theory seems to work well on paper.
Spillover is incredibly easy. All it means is the Colorado River poured into a basin. When it poured into that basin, it had to form a lake. And this lake was huge. All that lake had to do was rise and then spill across the plateau. It poured down, cutting rapidly, and over time you would have ended up with the beginnings of Grand Canyon very quickly.
At his college campus in Phoenix, Douglas is building a scale model experiment to see if his spillover theory actually works in real life. He sculpts tons of dirt into a model of the Colorado Plateau. Running faucets represent the flow of the Colorado River into the ancient lake.
Now we have our large lake. The water's getting higher, it's getting ready to spill across. We have a tiny little trickle of water pouring down off the lake. That little tiny trickle of water doesn't seem like much, but over time, that little bit of water flowing down that steep slope is going to gain energy. It's going to start cutting, making waterfalls that work their way back. One waterfall has now reached the lake. You can see that we have just released a significant amount of water, much more water than was previously pouring down. Now we have huge canyon cutting. Landslides are sloughing off the side of the canyon walls, the water flushing it downstream. The lake, you can see that it's starting to shrink in size. That lake is getting lower. And right there, you can see that we have cut our own small-scale version of the Grand Canyon.
Douglas's experiment proves that the spillover theory works in miniature. But he needs evidence to show that it could have happened on an infinitely bigger scale. Douglas sets out in search of a lake, large enough and old enough to be the source of his spillover flood. He has a prime suspect in mind. This is the site of the ancient Lake Bittahoche, 100 miles to the east of the Grand Canyon. And a clue here on the old lake bed reveals how deep this lake once was.
These green clays, which indicate deep lake water, this is the classic evidence for the giant lake necessary for the overflow explanation of Grand Canyon.
These green deposits are only created in one specific environment.
To have green lake clays, you need deeper water where there is little oxidation. I think that's indication that the Colorado River has arrived in this basin, that it's made its way from the Rocky Mountains to this location. And this is its basically stopover point before it eventually spills across to form the Grand Canyon.
Establishing the depth at this point lets Douglas work out how large an area was once covered by water. He compares the depth of the water with the contour height lines of the surrounding countryside. And that shows that Lake Bittahoche once spread over 20,000 square miles and contained more than 3,000 cubic miles of water. That makes it bigger than Lake Michigan. Douglas needs to date the age of this lake. For his spillover theory to work, it has to be older than the Grand Canyon, more than 5.5 million years. He unearths the proof he needs in these deep water fossils.
Okay, these fossil shells are freshwater mollusks, maybe as young as 6 million years old.
The dates match up. The lake was here at the right time to have spilled over and begun cutting the Grand Canyon. Dating the fossils helped confirm Douglas's belief, but his search for more evidence continues.
In reality, we're never going to know how it formed to 100% certainty unless someone builds a time machine. By doing this kind of work, all you're trying to do is increase your level of confidence on your ideas, build up your case, build up your evidence.
Building up his evidence is exactly what Joel Pedersen is doing. He is using the very latest technology to prove exactly how fast the Grand Canyon was carved. He has found the evidence he needs right here, at the very start of the Grand Canyon.
Here at Lee's Ferry, there are all of these gravels that are evidence of where the river has been in the past and the path that is taken during incision. And amongst the gravels, sometimes you see these great lenses of sand, and we can use the sand to get an absolute date on these deposits.
As the Colorado River carved out the canyon, it deposited more and more of the gravel and sand debris at this spot. Newer layers buried older layers over millions of years. And geologists now have instruments that can measure how light has affected individual atoms within the sand. That reveals precisely when each sand layer was originally buried, away from the light of the sun. For the technique to be accurate, it's essential that the sample is not exposed to daylight.
So here we can take a metal tube and we can hammer it into the sand outcrop, and in the metal tube then we'll get a sample of the sand and it'll stay out of sunlight, and then we take it back to a darkroom laboratory and remove the sand still sheltered from light, and then we can analyze the optical properties of it to get an absolute age. And in this case, the absolute age would tell us when the river was at this point in the landscape.
Back at the lab, Pedersen compares multiple sand samples, each from a different depth in the canyon deposits. Discovering the age of each individual layer of sand lets him estimate how rapidly the river has been cutting down through the rocks.
Here at Lee's Ferry, we can use this last 500,000 year history along with our absolute dates and all the information we get. And the rate of canyon cutting here is about 1,000 feet per million years.
That's 1 foot in every 1,000 years, a little more than 1 inch every century. It proves that the entire 5,300-foot deep Grand Canyon could have been cut in a little more than 5 million years. In geological terms, the mere blink of an eye. The investigation is assembling evidence on how the Grand Canyon was created. Green clay deposits support the theory that an ancient lake was big enough to spill over and trigger the canyon's creation. Deep water fossils prove that the lake existed 6 million years ago, the right time to have overflowed and cut the Grand Canyon. But proving how the canyon cutting began is only part of the investigation. This is one of the widest and deepest canyons in the entire world. And to discover how it grew so large, geologists will have to examine some of the most dramatic and dangerous features the canyon has to offer. The landscape of western Arizona has transformed from ancient mountains to prehistoric seas to a flat, uplifted plain. Just 5.5 million years ago, the Grand Canyon was cut through this plateau. It happened so fast that geologists had to think again about the awesome power of the Colorado River.
It cuts through rock not by the water wearing it away. You could pour water over rock for a long time and nothing would happen. It's the tools that the river carries. The river carries boulders and sand, and those bump against each other and they eat away at the rock.
Every day, the Colorado can carry almost 500,000 tons of rock and debris, enough material to fill more than 100 Olympic swimming pools. That is 5 tons every second. So investigating river erosion is never an easy task, because the powerful flow of the Colorado River has scoured and washed away many of the clues that the rock detectives need. They looked for evidence in the hundreds of rapids that disrupt the river's progress. The swirling rapids are created when flash floods sweep boulders into the river from the many smaller side canyons.
The river has to focus a lot of energy at these points to deal with all of the boulders that are coming in. The more coarse boulders and more resistant material that the river has to fight against to accomplish its incision, the steeper it gets.
As the water flows over the rapids, it cuts deep into the bedrock below. At this set of rapids alone, the river drops 10 feet. And there are a lot of rapids on this section of the Colorado.
So it put all these rapids together in a string through Grand Canyon, and that gives you the overall sort of unusually steep Grand Canyon profile of the river going through it.
Gravity and simple physics are at the heart of how the Colorado has carved so much rock so quickly. 5.5 million years ago, the Colorado River was flowing over the steep edge of the plateau that had been pushed up thousands of feet above sea level. The river ran rapidly over the steep downward slope and swept rough, rocky debris along in its wake. An incision formed, digging back into the edge of the plateau.
The power of the river to incise as it dropped off that huge escarpment must have been really great. And so the river quickly incised there, and that very steep drop-off of incision would have worked its way back upstream through the Grand Canyon region. It's sort of a waterfall that a few million years later has spread itself out through the length of the river.
It is this steep drop-off between the Colorado Plateau and the land beneath it that fuels the Colorado's incredible erosive power. The river begins its life high in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. For every mile that it travels, the river falls 10 feet. By contrast, the Mississippi River, a river moving 10 times as much water as the Colorado, meanders across a flat landscape. With no steep slope to drive it, the Mississippi can't carve any canyon. But the Grand Canyon is not just steep, it's also wide. And here, on the south rim, at the heart of the national park, the true majesty of the Grand Canyon is revealed. This is where the canyon is at its widest, as much as 18 miles from rim to rim. This landscape appears serene now, but its unique beauty was forged by violent forces.
Grand Canyon, oftentimes we just associate it with the Colorado River. The Colorado River is what cut the Grand Canyon. It formed the initial gash to allow the river to flow across. But what makes Grand Canyon grand is really its width and all the layers of rock that are exposed. And that isn't only solely tied to the Colorado River. What's happening is this rock that's exposed, it's being beaten on by rain, and the rain gets in there and it weathers the rock and it weakens it. And then because this is so incredibly steep, gravity will act on that material, transporting it deeper down into the river, flushing it back out. And that process just repeats over and over again to allow the canyon to get wider over time. We have classic rock falls that are cascading down onto the black rock in the far distance. Those events are indications that this is actively ongoing canyon widening and retreating from these processes.
The fall of these rocks is not a gradual process. This is erosion at its most violent.
Very few people are ever going to see Grand Canyon actually change. Like, I've spent numerous nights in Grand Canyon. I've only heard 1 or 2 rocks ever fall. But change will happen, and when it does happen, it happens very rapidly.
The rocks fall because both harder and softer rocks are layered, one on top of the other, in the canyon walls. The harder layers are made of limestone and sandstone. These rocks don't weather easily. But the softer shale beneath is made of mud that expands when it rains, causing the shale to crumble away.
Those weaker rocks, they weather and retreat back, and they undermine the resistant cliff rocks above that will then fail as dramatic rockfall landslide events, allowing the canyon to increase its width.
The rock falls are merely the first step towards increasing the Grand Canyon's enormous width. Without the help of an accomplice, the entire canyon would fill up with debris.
Without the Colorado River, you could not have the Grand Canyon as wide as it is. By flushing that material downstream, it wipes it all clean to allow a whole new material to build up again. And once you repeat that over and over again, it allows the canyon walls to retreat back. And the entire canyon just grows. These guys continue to march and push and move all that material downstream.
The mystery of how the Grand Canyon grew so deep and so wide is being solved. The Colorado Rapids demonstrate how the steepness of the riverbed helps carve the canyon so quickly. Rock falls on the canyon walls reveal how weaker rocks rapidly widen the canyon across the plains of Arizona. But this is far from the end of the Grand Canyon story. In just the last million years, the canyon has been transformed by other, overwhelmingly powerful natural forces. Geologists have established that over 1.7 billion years, the Grand Canyon emerged from ancient mountains and prehistoric seas to become one of North America's geological icons. This is a rare look at one of the most remote and secret parts of the Grand Canyon. A series of small cone-shaped mountains line the canyon's edge. And there are flows of black rock running down from each rim. They come from a remarkable era just 725,000 years ago, when the peace of the canyon was shattered by volcanoes. This is Toroweap Point, in a remote area known as the Arizona Strip. One of the most isolated places in the continental U.S. Few people other than geologists ever see this area, although it boasts some of the canyon's most stunning views. The rock detectives come to see how explosive volcanic eruptions have changed the canyon in the comparatively recent geological past. This black rock that seems to have spilled over the rim of the canyon is an ancient lava flow, what was once boiling hot rock, forever frozen in time.
Powell talked about a river of molten magma pouring down into a river of melted snow. and he talked about how dramatic it must have been, the boiling and seething and the steam, and it must have been amazing. You would picture red hot lava like you would see in Hawaii pouring down the canyon walls and coating them, and then once it reached the river, it would it would immediately create just giant clouds of steam.
The extensive lava flows, erupting from as many as 100 cinder cone volcanoes, had a dramatic effect on the Colorado River running below. Crow believes that on at least 8 occasions, the volcanic eruptions created huge lava dams that blocked the river completely.
Well, behind me here is one of many basalt remnants. They're the remains of lava flows that poured down the canyon, partially filling it. And then subsequently, the Colorado River has removed all but a few little chunks.
The lava dams brought even the powerful Colorado River to a halt. For a while. In time, the dams were no match for the Colorado. The rising pressure of the dammed river behind them eventually became too much, and they shattered. This explosive episode has left its mark on the canyon's walls. Today, the cones appear to be extinct and lifeless, although some geologists believe that the volcanoes might not be finished quite yet.
The last eruption that sent lava pouring into Grand Canyon probably occurred about 100,000 years ago. There is evidence for an eruption on the rim that didn't actually make it into Grand Canyon that's 1,000 years old. So there's I think a good chance that in the future there may be eruptions here as well.
The Grand Canyon's future has yet to be written, but investigators now understand the story of its past. The calcium in the garnet discovered at the base of the canyon reveals the ancient beginnings of this landscape, an immense mountain range. Limestone rocks show that the canyon was only formed 5.5 million years ago. Green clays that can only form in deep water prove that a huge lake, bigger than Lake Michigan, could have been the trigger for this canyon carving. And rock falls from the crumbling cliff faces of the canyon rim are evidence of how the canyon grew to the shape it is today. Geologists have been studying the canyon since the mid-1800s. Yet even after more than a century of investigation, the story is still far from finished.
The landscape is evolving and it's going to be changing through the geological future. And so the story about the geology and the fascinating questions here is not one that's over, and it's going to continue to evolve as scientists continue to do work here.
The dynamic geological phenomenon of the Grand Canyon is a place where the vast fiery forces within the Earth's crust do battle with the inexorable power of water. The result? A natural wonder whose walls record nearly 2 billion years of our planet's turbulent geological history.
What are you doing, Thomas?
Oh, shooting with this fisheye. Cool.
How wide is the fisheye?
8 to 15. It's very cool. You're gonna have to shoot with it. It's very cool.
Oh, it gives you a circular image?
Yeah, it can give you up to, see, like, if you, with the full frame sensor, it can give you a complete circle. So, see, there you go. Oh, that's a little overexposed there. So something like this. You know, complete circle.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's interesting for stuff like this. Cool stuff. So I guess we're gonna do a group portrait here, huh?
Oh, are we?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Charles is setting it up. Actually, that's a very nice light for one person.
Sure. So Trey, what did you see?
Oh, well, it's strange to see such huge fallen logs that point right towards the sun. And really, forests are really hard to shoot in because oftentimes it just turns into a big mass of chaos. And so if you can ever get leading lines that can help draw the user's eye around, it makes it much more interesting, because otherwise you just see like a morass of branches and lines and shapes and colors, and it's more messy than it is interesting. So in all forest shots I try to break up the chaos with lines and that sort
Now,
of
do you
thing.
always shoot HDR?
No. People
But
think I do.
It seems like most of the times I see you shoot, you're shooting like 6 frames, right?
This one is going to be 7. You can hear that. So it's doing half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 8 seconds, 15, and 30. The shutters open different speeds, different amounts of time for each of those. It's not all shots, but in this situation you have to do HDR because I'm looking right into the sun. But you know, if you're standing here, you can look and see all this texture, right? You can see all these little things. You can see the shadows. You can see the golden hues. You can see all the lines of texture in here. And you just can't get that with a regular shot. So you've got to do HDR. Really,
Now,
HDR.
how did you see the shot? Because I was walking by it, and I noticed you're very, very good at seeing things.
Well, I think what happens over time is, you know, you kind of have your own personal FOV, right? Your 90-degree field of view. And so I used to be like a Quake player, right? Like a lot of people. And I would always go into the config and set my FOV to 130, right? So I could see more around me. It makes you a more effective Quake player. And so that's a pretty good analogy to what I do here. But so I have a wild FOV, but also I kind of extend my vision out. Like I'm pretty good at envisioning what it would look like over there, right? Because as you move through a 3D environment, your brain does map it out. And you can kind of picture, well, what would it look like over there? So I'm getting better at predicting, like, it's interesting over there. So if you can kind of extend your personal field of vision, you know, in a 20-foot diameter around you and see everything as you go down, it's much more than just seeing 90 degrees right in front of you. I'm not always successful, but I'm getting better over time.
Will this shot get better as the light disappears? As the sun goes down, or?
Well, it would be better if all these people were out of the way, but...
Hear that, people? Get out of the way!
Dodge, throw some pine cones at him. That's what Mike goes.
No, I think it's best with the sun.
Yeah.
It's good anytime with all these leading lines and this sort of thing. One problem though is the scale, because these are so huge. You know, we can see how huge these are.
Yeah.
But the thing that helps with the scale is that normal-sized tree right in the middle.
Yeah.
And so when people see a normal-sized tree surrounded by giant trees, the trees look giant. And so we've been shooting these huge Mariposas, and we asked Kimberly to stand in front of one of them so that you get a sense of scale. Otherwise, they just look like trees, because you have to have something humans understand in a relative scale to see the magnitude of the objects around us.
Yep. Well, cool. Well, let's get the kids out of the way, and then you can shoot some. Okay. Oh, and you got to get Thomas Hawk out of the way, too.
He's usually not in the way. I'm not very
On the ground.
Suggestive.
Julie, you have to stand back.
Am I in your picture?
Yeah. Okay, now get down.
Like here?
Let's try that, and let's try. Yeah, that's pretty cool, actually. Let's try a couple of those. Okay, see if you can get even closer with your face. There we go. Okay, hold still for a second. That's a crazy shot.
Let me see.
That is a crazy shot. Okay, can you set the camera down? Is there a way to set that down just for a second? Let's try it with So here we have a fisheye with a take on the
Let me zoom in. So.
fisheye in the wilderness. A take on the standard fisheye. Scobalizer in the big trees.
That's pretty funny.
With I'd +1 that shirt, so Google should like that, right?
Absolutely.
Good one.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Who are you?
Tony Payne.
Hey, from Google Chrome, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you.
And there's Thomas Hawk.
New Year.
You get any good shots, man?
Yeah, I think so.
You gotta show me some.
I'd like the one of Jarvie up on the top.
He went out on the ledge, huh?
He did, yeah. There's Trey, Kimberly, Karen. Well, you can't really see here, however. So if we zoom in, there's got Jarvie out on the ledge. Zoom out.
That's scary.
Yeah.
3,000 feet straight down.
Yeah. Is it 3,000?
It's about that.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter.
Only takes a few.
So Scott.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. First photo walk of 2012.
Yes.
So you getting good shots?
Of course. That was
we all
fun.
got good shots
we
of
got
you.
here, yeah, out on the ledge. We got here almost in time for really good star shots.
Yeah.
An hour earlier would have been.
We got here about 6 in the morning. At 6 in the morning, and sunrise is at 6:58, which shows how fast the light changes around here.
Yeah.
So you really need to get out here 2 hours before sunrise to get stars.
At this time of the year, yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Do you have any shots to show me?
Yeah. Let me go back to them fast. I do lots of shots, so I play around. Oh, here. This is a fun one of the man in action here.
The man being who?
Trey here.
Oh, Trey.
So he's being kind of posed here, and then afterwards he's like, "Oh, I'm done," and laughs, and so he has a really good expression.
Yep.
So.
That's cool.
With the half dome in the back and his tripod. What's more, Trey? That's other than that, you have to go way back to see any other good ones.
Yeah. Well, cool. We'll be looking for your shots on Google Plus.
Exactly. Oh wait, hey, look at this one.
Oh, who's that guy? What did you do? Put me in front of a green screen or something?
Yes.
It looks fake. It's cool.
Nice. Yeah.
Nice light up there.
Exactly.
That's why we get up early in the morning, man. 4:30 a.m.
Go the four of us. But no, there's five of us.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Did you guys come together?
I'm just real
You
quiet.
and Karen?
Yeah.
Who are you?
Drove. Who am I? I'm the real Trey Ratcliffe.
So Scott here has traveled the world with me. We went to London together. We went to France and Switzerland together. We travel all over the world together. He's sort of my right-hand man. Has helped me out. Yeah.
We've only been to Florida together.
Yeah. Well, in fact,
he was in Florida too.
I feel jealous now.
Yeah. In fact, one of my secrets to success is Scott here, because you know, he was like a fan, and I should let you tell the story because
No, go ahead. I want to hear your version of it. Go ahead.
So it sounds weird to say because now you're a friend, but and so he contacted me. He was into HDR and photography and found my tutorial and saw all this stuff, and then he said, "Hey, let me get back to you." He goes, "I'm actually an expert in SEO or whatever," and I'm like, "Whatever, I don't believe in SEO. You know, I understand Google or this sort of thing." He goes, "Let me just help you out for free. I won't charge you. You've done so much for me." So he spent just a couple hours with me. He told me these things to tweak out on my website, and it really helped us out with Google. And you know, we were already a really good authority on HDR, but we put some things into place to help Google understand this. And so really, thanks to him, it like doubled the traffic to our website. So I owe him the world.
All right, now I need to know these secrets.
Is that still rolling?
So, what are three things you did for Trey's website? Tell them.
Well, the first thing is I don't do any black hat stuff. I knew that when you search for HDR tutorial or HDR photography, he's the person you really should find. So I just helped him do some stuff so that he could be found. I mean, that's who you want to find, is someone like this if you're searching for those phrases. Yep. So it was simple stuff. I mean, he already had a lot of power on his site, a lot of authority in Google's eyes. And I just helped him tweak stuff using his own internal links, saying what, you know, he wanted to rank for, optimizing the titles and then the H1 tags. It was very, very simple stuff, but it's just stuff that most people don't know to do. And
they still don't.
They don't. And I mean, it really does come down to if you give people what they want, you'll naturally get the Google love for it. And I really believe that.
No, but it's just like the title tag. A lot of people used to name their business like Joe's Diner. Well, that's not what people are searching for. They're searching for great hamburger in Jackson Hole or whatever.
Right. And it's also selling
you
the click.
Think about how people are going to search for you, not what you want to talk.
Exactly. But plus, you know, when you show up in the search results, that's like an ad. So you want it to sell your services. And so just having him update his meta description tag and going after the right keywords. And so when you search phrases now, his search results really stand out. I mean, they speak to you. You know, it answers your question of what you typed into the search box, and that helps too.
So how much does it cost to hire you?
Not for hire.
No, actually, so that's the thing about Scott. He's the real deal because you can't hire him. He's not like one of these SEO tools out there that's always just pushing themselves.
It's
right?
funny, when I did the tour of Zappos,
yeah,
they tell you everything, but they don't let you touch the SEO guys.
Oh, really?
No, that's the secret sauce at Zappos.
right. I guess so.
And those guys make good money.
Right. He does it all for himself. He doesn't consult or anything. He just did it as a friendly gesture, and we ended up just getting along just fine. So now we travel around the world together.
Yeah.
It was a win-win.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. What's your favorite place you've been to with Trey?
I guess it's got to be Fabian's house. I think his website designer kind of chauffeured us around Nimes, France, and I can't remember the name of the town that he lives in, but he took us back to his house, and it was like what's the word for that little background?
It was like a chateau, and he like lives on a winery, and they served us a home-cooked French meal out under the bowers of this old tree in front of the wine field, and they didn't have grass. It was like a field of mint. So as you walked across it, like mint wafted up into the air and made this incredible home-cooked dinner and breads and cheeses and wines, and it was like out of a storybook.
So we just wasted your last sunset of 2011.
No, it's okay.
The last rays of light.
No, we already got the shots we needed to do. It's now we'll just get some twilight shots.
Yeah. Are we really waking up early in the morning to get the first sunrise?
Well, I'm waking up early. That's what I do.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bed.
Oh, okay.
That's one way
I
to
just
solve
woke
that
up from my
problem.
nap. I'm ready to go.
Okay.
I got 2 bottles of whiskey. We'll see if you can wake up after that. Anyways, who else is here? Who are you?
I'm Dustin.
Yeah.
Dustin Bess.
And you work at Smug Mug, I take
I
it?
do work for Smug Mug.
You work for Don McCaskill and
Yep.
Chris McCaskill? All the
Yep.
McCaskills?
Work for those guys.
Yeah, what do you do?
I do all of our trade show and events. So I direct all of that.
So you travel a lot?
Travel around.
Yeah.
Yep.
What was the job interview at Smug Mug like? How did you get your job?
I pestered them for a year and a half,
Okay.
honestly. So I'd used Smug Mug for a long time, and I loved their customer service. That's what got me at first. And then I went down and visited with them and had lunch with them, and just fell in love with the company. And so then I was like, I really want to go work for these guys.
Yeah.
So I pestered them for a really long time until they took me seriously. So that was my job interview process at Smug Mug. So
That's cool. That's how you get the best jobs, though.
yeah,
I mean,
I actually told them, I said, you know what? Since you're not taking me seriously, I'll come work for you for free, just so you can see what I'm capable of, and that seemed to be the ticket. So, but they paid me all along, so I never did have to work for them for free. But I was
and you get
willing to.
Great lunches too.
I know, except I'm traveling all the time, so I don't really get the lunches very often.
Very cool. Where can we find you and your work?
DustinBest.com.
And on Smug Mug?
And on Smug Mug, that redirects to my Smug Mug site.
Okay.
And Twitter is Dustin Best. Facebook is Dustin Best.
Very cool.
So
Thanks for coming along, by the way. That's an awesome
yeah,
photo.
it's fun.
Well, if I'm on video, you should do the voice.
No, you really.
Trey, who are you
So-
talking about now?
I'm talking about Karen Hutton.
That's Karen Hutton.
Who's become a friend. She did the voiceover for Stuck on Earth. She does professional voiceover. She's like top 3 in the world. She's fantastic. And so anyway, you might know this if you go to Vegas for conventions or whatever, and you're in the elevator, right? And this little voiceover comes on, and they kind of advertise the services of the hotel. One of the things they say is, we have all these movies you can rent, and then you hear this voice come on, and it says, and if it's after hours, you can order any adult movie you want, and it won't even show up on your bill. And she's the one that
The best part is, the best part is, it won't even show up on your bill.
That's great.
Yeah, I think it's kind of creepy to actually see her say it, but when you hear it,
When you hear it, it's exciting. When you see this and you're like, thank you, Trey.
So
I
how did you
appreciate
two-
that.
no, you know what I mean.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I know
It's because
what you
you
mean.
just have this vision.
Don't worry.
So how did
know?
you two meet?
Well, so I have this thing I saw on the website, this HDR video tutorial, and we have a private section of the website called the Clubhouse. And inside the Clubhouse, all the students we come in and we share secrets and talk about things. And we have this one thread in the forum that says, "Tell us what you do in real life." And in there, she goes, "Oh, I'm Karen Hutton. I do voice acting, professional voice acting." I thought that was interesting. I kind of filed that away. And when we did this project, Stuck on Earth, I thought, oh, we know this gal, Karen. I called her, and she was thrilled. And since then, we've been on kind of photo walks all over the world together. And now I think she's gotten really popular on Google+. How many followers do you have?
I don't know, today was 260,000.
She's got over 250,000
More than
followers.
me.
Crazy.
Damn.
Crazy.
Yes, she's got over 250,000 followers.
You're on the suggested user list, aren't you?
Yeah.
She goes, "Do you know
Yes,
the
I
best thing
am.
about the suggested user list?" And I said, "No." She goes, "I'm on it." So anyway, yes, but she's a great photographer. She deserves to be on it. She has a show on there. She does a hangout show called Life Through the Lens, where she gets a lot of other female photographers in for a little Estro Fest, and they talk about photography and all kinds of stuff.
Hi.
What?
Is that not what you call it? I don't know.
No, that's just what I say when you say that.
Oh.
It is life through the lens. It's about creativity, about what goes on behind the lens, through the lens, that then comes out of the lens.
Well said.
Isn't that good?
Yeah.
And who are you?
I'm Tina Ratcliffe, Trey's other half.
Better half.
Better half.
Better
yes.
60%, really. Half is I don't know why it's called better half.
This is a big ass tree.
Yeah, it is a big ass tree. Ooh, I like that.
And did you see the moon?
I like that moon over my
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is one of those trees that all these crazy Californians go up and live in, so they don't cut it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is a nice one. I might live in this one too. Maybe it's not so crazy.
So you're not shooting too much here.
No, I'm
enjoying
commiserating with my peeps.
You know,
Yeah.
6,000-year-old
it's nice.
sequoias are sort of passé to trade.
6,000.
Well, these photo walks are nice because they're. We've been doing more and more of these, mostly organized around Google Plus,
Yeah.
and they're just nice little celebrations of photography. You know, they're always free. And photographers are kind of lonely people, I think, actually, right? We're sort of these introverts, so it's nice to go out and.
A lot of us started it so we didn't have to be in front of the camera.
Yeah, that's right.
Didn't work out so well for
like you right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm more comfortable holding the camera than being on it.
No, no, people like you because you're genuine.
Wait,
you've got
this
your
the part where we
Lytro.
give each other a kiss?
Is it that
No,
Lytro?
I don't have a Lytro.
Robert, you just missed it. We gave each other a kiss on the lips. You just totally missed it.
No, we'll have to Photoshop that in later.
Oh,
A little bit of lipstick right there. So
No.
You gotta pay attention. No, I'm kidding.
That's Thomas Hawk.
Yeah.
So it's a
Are you getting good shots?
Yeah, great shots.
Yeah. I saw you had Kimberly doing some modeling for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you get a release?
Yes, a model release. She's already signed the model release, right?
yes,
Now, when do you need
put
a
her
model?
on? Put her on video right now. So she's giving me all rights to all photos of her, right?
yes. Thomas Hawk has all rights.
See, there we go.
So all the photos.
Even if you end up in a Bank of America advertisement or something?
Of course.
Indeed.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
That's all you need.
There we go.
So,
You're very charming. So you did that.
That'll hold up in court, won't it,
Yeah.
Trey?
Yeah.
That'll be perfect.
Yeah.
say that.
by the way, when do you need a model release? Do you guys know?
You know,
I know.
I think if her photo goes into commercial use
Yeah.
and it's being used to make money, then you really need a model release.
Unless it's
Yeah.
fine art, like the Newson wig versus Philip DeCorsia or whatever his name is, that artist. Remember that case?
Yeah.
He was he had a hidden camera in New York and was taking pictures of passerbys, unbeknownst to them, and he took a picture of Newsonweg, who was this Hasidic Jewish man with hat and beard, and look. Have you seen the photograph?
Yeah, with the curls and everything.
It's outstanding.
Yeah.
It's an outstanding photograph, and I think he sold it for like $40,000 or something at a gallery as a print, and he sued him over it because there was no model release.
Yeah.
And he won because it's fine art. Fine art or editorial use, like newspaper, you don't need it for that.
Yep.
Yeah.
But commercial use, if you're selling toothpaste, you do.
Yeah, and editorial use is getting more and more slippery as, you know, what is editorial nowadays? There's millions of street photographers now that just go out, you know, on the streets of Tokyo and take photos and publish them on their blog because they think it's artistic and interesting. I think you don't need a model release for this kind of stuff because you're just making art. You're just capturing the world around you. And
Yeah.
it isn't a public place, and you're not really
But
making...
it still costs money to defend a lawsuit, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
And so that's...
I would know.
Yeah.
You've had to defend
Unfortunately.
a couple.
Yeah, we've been in some lawsuits, but mostly it's us suing companies like Time Magazine, and people have taken our stuff and used it in iPad ads and
I've
all
been
sorts
more
of...
on the wrong end of the lawsuit.
Yeah.
It hurts either way because it costs money.
Yeah.
And if you win, it's okay. But if you don't win, that hurts.
Yeah, lawyers.
Well, cool. Where do we find your work? ThomasHawk.com?
ThomasHawk.com, Google Plus.
Yeah, Google
Search Thomas Hawk on on Google.
Yeah.
Lots of places pop up.
And you're Trey
I'm Trey Ratcliffe, and my blog is stuckincustoms.com.
You're not stuck in customs today?
No. We're free and clear today.
Very cool. Well, let's go get some dinner.
Okay.
Or shoot the moon.
Yeah.
Twilight.
Yeah.
Tree.
It's good.
Down for a little while. Yeah, it's endured.
So who are you?
I'm Jarvie.
Scott Jarvie.
Yeah.
And where do you live?
I live in Utah.
Utah.
Yeah.
And you take a lot of pictures.
I take a lot of pictures.
We've seen you on Google Plus. So what are you taking a picture of here?
This is the enduring giant. It's a big sequoia.
In Yosemite.
Yep, in Yosemite here.
That's awesome. So what are you trying to capture when you're out doing something like this?
Well, I suppose I approach all my pictures kind of like I do. I'm a wedding photographer, so like portraits. So I'm trying to use the polarizer to get the skies nice and blue.
Yep.
So it's the opposite direction of the sun, so it's able to darken up pretty decently. So
very cool.
Trying to put it in between the two trees, frame it in there.
You're out here with all the Google Plusers.
Yeah, exactly.
What kind of camera you got?
I got a D700.
Yay. You like it?
Yeah, I've had it for 3.5 years. I think it's about time for another one. It's gone through a lot. There's about almost 400,000 pictures on it. So.
Wow. And you do this commercially in the wedding business?
Yeah, I do full-time photography.
Very cool. So when you approach a wedding, what do you if somebody was thinking about shooting a wedding, in fact, my brother is thinking about shooting a wedding for the first time. What should be some of the basics that he thinks about capturing?
Well, my phrase is always to avoid distractions. Make sure that you avoid distractions, but don't get so caught up. Don't get caught up in the little technical and details and stuff like that. Just it's all about memories and capturing personality. So you learn it all now, and when you're there, you should not be stressing yourself about any those technical things. You should have them down.
You shouldn't shoot it professionally alone for the first time, though. You should shoot with other people first.
There's a lot of things you shouldn't do. My first time I did that. So,
did you really?
Yeah.
Did it come out all right?
It came out all right, so I was lucky.
I did that.
Oh, did you shoot a wedding?
Yeah, I shot a couple of weddings when I was in high school.
Oh,
I learned never work for your friends. That's what I learned.
Yeah, it's very much a customer service, very personality driven. Your personality and capturing their personality. Well, that's my style. I mean, the old school style is much more technical and posed and stuff. So
yeah, I love intimacy, which means getting close. That's one of my rules for video or for photos. Well, that's the reason I get close. I'm only about a foot and a half from your face.
Yeah.
Audio works better when you're close.
Yes,
and the first rule of video is get good audio. If your audio sucks, everybody's like, I can't hear anything. They don't care if it's wobbly and stuff. They care about the audio.
So this here, I mean, actually, I'd love to go to the other side because I
Let's
like
go.
The backlit type stuff.
Let's go. That looks awesome.
Interesting lighting. We already shot it. Sorry, you're too late.
There's some more Google Plusers.
Did you steal the light?
We stole the final photos.
Maybe I can eke out a few lost pixels.
This is the last sunset of 2011.
Wow.
That's right. That's right.
So
which
you better make this one count.
Well, it's a fairly arbitrary measurement, but it's as good as any, so I will try. That's a nice tree, isn't it?
It's big.
I don't know. Y'all's pictures are.
So how do you make it look big?
I will tell you that.
Are you gonna pose somebody there?
We might put Kimberly in her poncho over there. Kimberly?
I'm Red Riding Hood.
Okay, well, let's get over there. And yeah, this tree. Yeah, get over there with Jarvie, and just strike a pose that's not too. Too posy. Yeah, just be cool. Go get in the cleft there, inside the isosceles dark spot. But we got to get closer. We're too far away.
Keep moving.
I don't want you to fall too far behind.
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm shooting video. I can't compete with you guys.
Like a condor. Hands, strong hands, not floppy hands.
No, strong hands like I'm a bird.
Let's go talk to Thomas.
Can you go a little bit more this way? Yeah, right there. And now, now spread that out again like that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, maybe bring the fingertips in just a little bit.
My fingertips in?
Yeah.
Like I'm oming?
You want her to look off to the side? They get a portfolio or
yeah.
What are you going for, Thomas?
I'm shooting silhouette shots of Kimberly right now. Do
So-
that again, Kimberly. Yeah, there
So
we go.
bright sky underexposing him a little bit.
Bright sky. I'll show you in a second. It's interesting, kind of an off.
Shooting straight
Do it
into
again
the sun.
and put your fingers up on the other side. Or I mean just out so we can see your fingers. Yeah.
No, this is an example.
Bring your what is that? Your left hand down.
Walk like an Egyptian.
Yeah, walk like an Egyptian.
That's like an Egyptian. Hold on. Did I look like a duck?
You don't look like a duck at all.
YMCA.
So this is an example of breaking rules, right? Because when you first learn photography, you're told, don't shoot into the sun.
Yeah, Karate Kid it.
Karate Kid out here.
Yeah.
So Thomas is using his 135 f2 lens. What are you using?
24.
A 24?
1.4. But I should be doing what he's doing, but...
Okay, that's...
So we'll have completely different shots, though.
Yeah, we will. It'll be still nice either way, though. Okay, turn around and look the other way. Look out there.
Don't jump off.
Back to over a little bit more. Yeah, right there, right there. Okay, now turn around and look out at this mountain. Okay, now spread your wings again.
I'm gonna go over here, Thomas.
Put your left hand forward just a little. There you go.
Now tilt with your right hand higher in the air.
And look off to your left a little.
This is one thing I noticed about you, Thomas. You shoot a lot of pictures.
Oh yeah.
How many have you shot today so far?
Probably 900 or so.
Go to your left a little more.
Maybe 1,000.
In an hour?
Yeah.
And then, okay, you ready? Look.
But you know, like
look
shooting
off to
like
your left again,
Kimberly
like you were
here,
doing
like
a few moments ago.
this is
With
a
your
different
left
thing.
hand up higher than the right
Because
hand.
you got to shoot a lot more.
My left hand up higher.
Yeah, and then look off to your left.
Because you're waiting for the right thing?
Yeah, and you know,
Other,
you
your
want to
right
catch
hand
just
back
the
a little.
right,
There you are, good.
just
Look
the
off
right,
a little more.
right pose. I mean, it's kind of silhouettes are tricky because. Okay, now turn around.
Every now and then, I get a little.
There we go.
Turn around.
Every now and then. Okay, hold on, almost done.
Okay.
Stay there. Okay, now I'm gonna do some out of focus stuff, just to kind of.
No, you have.
Play around.
Me to play with my poncho.
Yeah.
So you're just defocusing?
Yeah, I'm defocusing now. Trying to get weird, you know, different. There, yeah, just move around like that. Just trying to get, I'll show you in a second here. Just trying to get different stuff. A little more artistic.
I should do a jump like, you know, well, no, not really jump. I can't really jump. That would not be good.
Okay. All right, Kimberly, we got you.
All right, here.
All right.
So.
Cool.
I see you.
So we're trying to get, like that's kind of interesting. So the female form obviously is much better form than the male
that's
form.
nice. That's nice.
That's very nice, yeah. See, now I'm getting more close-ups here.
Oh, I'm gonna go out here.
Okay. Cal? Just like this? I'm done?
Go, huh?
Those are fun of me.
Yeah. Silhouette. I like that one. It's kind of setting up.
Yeah.
I love shooting silhouettes. That'll be interesting. And of course you can process these, so there'll be all kinds of different things we can do with them. And we can HDR them if we want, you know, with some of these.
Yeah.
But
cool.
Yeah.
So Tony, you got a weird piece of gear here.
Yeah, it's a,
compared to everybody else's Nikons or Canons.
It's a Sony SLT, so it's got a translucent mirror. So the mirror doesn't actually flip up when it takes the shots.
So why is that cool?
Well, it has 12 frames per second since it doesn't need to move the mirror out of the way.
No moving parts? Or fewer moving parts?
Fewer moving parts. I actually really wish that they had sealed the sensor since they don't need the mirror to move. So, you still have dust problems, which I think is kind of stupid.
Yeah. But, how are the images it takes?
High ISO, not so great, unless you turn on the multi-frame noise reduction.
Yeah.
Landscapes, though, it's great. It's got ISO 50, which I use pretty much non-stop.
And what else are you shooting here?
That's a Mamiya 645 medium format film camera.
Film camera?
Yeah, I just got this.
Damn.
Just got it for Christmas, so I haven't developed a single roll. I have no idea if any of them are coming out.
They should.
We'll see.
All you need is good exposure.
Yeah.
I bet those things are sharp though when you get them off. Very cool. How much does this cost?
It's $1,400.
$1,400.
Yeah.
Very cool. What do you think, Trey? You want one?
Well, I want one of the descendants of that. That's the future of photography.
Okay, let's talk about
SLT
this.
lenses.
Why do you say that's the future of photography instead of an SLR with a moving mirror?
Well, I think in 3 years, maybe in 2 years, people will look at photographers that carry these kind of cameras and think that they're dinosaurs, like the way we look at
Film.
people that are
Yeah,
film
like
photographers.
that film camera.
That's sort of a specialty thing. That's okay. But I mean, you know, yeah, because these, you know, the reason these are so big is not because they're awesome, but just because they have to have room for this mechanical mirror that flips up and down inside like an old Da Vinci-esque mechanical device. It doesn't make sense, you know, in this world in 2012 now, everything we have has no moving parts. You know, an iPhone has no moving parts. Computers really have no moving parts. It's all SSD. This is one of the only conveniences that we have in our lives that still has moving parts. So that's going away. And what the next phase is, I call it the third generation of digital cameras, is these mirrorless cameras, which I think is an awful way to describe them, because you don't define a category by what it doesn't have.
Yeah.
Right. So mirrorless, that word should go away. I think these should be called third generation cameras. They didn't call automobiles horseless buggies for long. You know, that only stuck around for a few
What were the
years.
first two generations of cameras? Like film and then digital, or?
No, I think as far as digital photography goes, the first were these kind of early
Quick
entrants. Yeah, you know, the very first digital cameras that were out
I
there.
used to use a quick take, which was
Yeah.
640 by 480.
Yeah, my
and-
first one was it might have been some Kodak 640 by 480.
And 16 Shades of Gray, I think.
Right. Yeah, and these
Took
were just
crafty photos.
they were almost like prototypes, right?
Yeah.
But they got it there, and they got the hobbyist interested and think, oh, there could be something to this digital photography. And then I would call this the second generation. Everything from the consumer to the prosumer to the professional line. These big cameras that take, up to 24 megapixels, super high resolution, full frame cameras, giant sensors. Even most old school film photographers now agree that these do equal or better job than the film, right? Once it crossed that line, if you can't tell if it was an old style of photo or a new style of photo, that's really that's when these came into being.
Yeah.
But this, like everything else, is going away, and the next evolution is these cameras without moving parts inside. Sony has this technology called SLT. It's called single lens translucent, where instead of having a mirror that flips up and down, it's a mirror that lets most of the light through and reflects some up to a phase change system, and that's what grabs the autofocus. This is clearly the future.
Interesting.
And I think this will probably be the last DSLR I have.
Really?
Yeah, I'm going to stop investing money in lenses and DSLR bodies, because the next generation of these things is really where it's going to be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you have a red camera. Now, can the red camera do some of this stuff, or is that just for video work?
Yeah, I have a
that has
red
a pretty
Epic.
high resolution.
Yeah, super high, up to 5K, and it does hundreds of frames per second, right?
Yeah.
And every one of those frames is a raw file that you can pluck out and process. So photography in the future, and this is really a sea change, and a lot of people won't accept it. I think photographers are going to fight this, but photography is not so much about taking a photo as much as like capturing a moment, right? And then when you get this moment, you're probably going to end up with 1,000 frames.
Yeah.
And then the photographer's job is to go back and use a new system where you scan quickly through these 1,000 photos and you pick out the most interesting ones. That still takes the eye of a photographer.
Yeah.
It still takes understanding composition. You still have to set up the camera the right way to begin with.
But I just can't see using a video camera to do still photo. Like what you do with HDR, shooting 9 frames of one scene and then do a lot of process and
Right.
a lot of darkroom kind of Photoshop magic to make it look really great.
Right.
I can't see doing that with a video camera.
Well, you will.
Okay.
But the reason is that, you know, when I take a picture now and you hear it click multiple times, the only reason that you hear this clicking is because the technology is so slow, right? Every time you hear a click, it's processing, it's downloading, it's taking the sensor data, it's writing it to the card. That clicking is more a factor of the lack of speed of the technology, right? It's like when we used to connect with 300 baud modems, and we'd hear that handshaking, and you know, we don't even think about that anymore. So the future is not one with clicking, it's one where just massive amounts of visual data is being immediately recorded to the card. And then your job in post-processing is to go pluck out the frames later.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you think that you're going to see cameras that do more HDR stuff in the camera, so you don't do as much in Photoshop? And you use Photomatics, right?
Yeah, I use Photomatics.
You have a whole tutorial section on your website that teaches people how to do what you do?
Yeah, we have a free tutorial. We've taught hundreds of thousands of people how to do this stuff. It's really fun. But HDR will work its way into the camera, but it still takes the eye and brain of a human to figure out what makes a good photo, because these HDR algorithms, they're still dumb, right? They don't have the same neural network pattern matching processes that our brain does when we, you know, assess what is happening in the visual world around us.
Yeah.
So HDR algorithms, they have their problems. Like, for example, they don't really know the difference between daytime and nighttime, inside and outside. They process it all evenly. And so as humans, as we navigate the Earth, we know that everything above the horizon is generally brighter, a few stops brighter than everything below the horizon. But Photomatics and all these other HDR algorithms, they will even it out so that the sky has just about the same tones as the ground. So I go later into Photoshop and clean it up by remixing some of the original photos and brightening the sky and getting rid of some of the dirty areas.
This is why some of the HDR looks cartoonish, right?
Yeah, that's why I think a lot of people's first HDRs really don't look so good, is because they don't go in and make it look more realistic. It's a fine line, right? There's a line there between art and reality and perception and memory, and it's a very flexible thing. It's very personal to people. Everyone thinks they see the world the same way, but really we internally visualize it differently.
No, and some people don't even see it the same way, right? Mark Zuckerberg is colorblind, right? And you're blind in one eye, right? Or nearly blind in one eye?
Yeah, right.
So you don't see the world I do.
Right.
I see it more in 3D than you do.
Right, that's sort of like this old chestnut that everyone sees the world differently, but it's really true. And I know like a lot of people are really into black and white photography, and that's because their brain, when they see the world, they first look at shape, line, and contrast, right? And this is what first their brain starts to match on to make sense of the world.
Yeah.
When I look at the world, I see that stuff too, but first I see color, light, and saturation. So that's why color photography is more appealing to me and to a lot of other people. But I can see it for sure when they look at the reactions to my photography. I'm very interested in the haters, right? I'm very interested in people that just don't like it. Some people are quite vitriolic and bitter, and they've got other psychological baggage that feeds into that. But some people just don't like it. And it's not because they're anti-new stuff. It's just because their brain processes imagery different. And, you know, I'm comfortable with that. But I know it does appeal to a great number of people who also see the world like I do.
Yeah. Well, you show us the world the way it should look, right?
Well, I think so.
Because I've been walking around with you, and the images you make are like, that wasn't quite real. It was better than real.
Well, it snowballs. And in a way, the more you take this kind of photo, the more you start to see colors and texture, and the more you start to appreciate things.
Yeah. I mean, I was in Walt Disney World with you, and you shot a room, and when I saw the final result, I was like, holy shit! I didn't see any of that in that room, you know, and it looked like a palace, right? But
you're a photographer like me, right?
Yeah.
And you like to do macro stuff, right? But before you were a macro photographer, you probably didn't quite notice all the little things around you.
Yeah.
Right now that you do this kind of stuff, you see these beautiful little textures and found objects around you, and it kind of makes your life richer. Well, it's the same way with HDR. Now I see color I see texture, I see light changes in a much more visceral way than I used to.
Yeah.
So it's kind of whatever artistic path you go into, you become really attuned to that world, and it makes your own world richer. So other people that are into this sport too, they really get into it because they start to see the world like this too. So some people say what I capture is super realistic, or the way the world can be or should be, but for those of us, it's actually the way we see it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for spending some time. Where do we find you?
I'm on Google+, Trey Ratcliffe, and stuckincustoms.com.
Yay.
Yeah.
And that's where the tutorials are that
Yeah.
teach people what equipment you use and what processing you do and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, all that good stuff.
Get a cable release, get a tripod. Actually, you don't even use a cable release, which I find interesting.
No, you don't need a cable release. No. Yeah.
Just a good tripod.
Yeah, just a good tripod, and there's some tricks inside here where you can set it up so you don't need a cable release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Earth, a unique planet, restless and dynamic. Continents shift and clash. Volcanoes erupt. Glaciers grow and recede. Titanic forces that are constantly at work, leaving a trail of geological mysteries behind. One of these mysteries is centered here, in the Grand Canyon in Arizona. Close to 1 billion tons of rock have been carved out of the ground. The canyon left behind could hold all the river water on Earth and still be less than half full. For more than a century, scientists have debated how and when this vast chasm was created. And now, geologists are uncovering fresh evidence of how the Grand Canyon fits into the ever-evolving story of how the Earth was made. The Grand Canyon, one of America's most spectacular natural wonders. A canyon 18 miles across at its widest point, 277 miles long, and more than a mile deep. It is so vast that it can even be seen from space. Although Hell's Canyon in Idaho is almost half a mile deeper, and Australia's Capertee Valley is nearly a mile wider, the Grand Canyon remains the most famous of them all. And it also holds one of geology's greatest mysteries. Just how did the Colorado River, only 1/10 the size of the Mississippi, form such a large canyon? The answer has eluded scientists for more than a century, because many of the clues they normally rely on have been swept away by the river's water over millions of years, or buried by landslides, or destroyed by volcanoes.
It seems like we should understand perfectly how the Grand Canyon formed. The problem is we've lost a tremendous amount of evidence. It's like a murder mystery where most of the evidence is lost. And so the best we can do is piece together the evidence that we have.
Even so, slowly but surely, this geological icon is giving up its most ancient secrets. The canyon's richly colored layers, or the canyon was cut. They can tell him not only when they were formed, but also precisely how deep in the Earth's crust they were made. These tiny stones, embedded throughout the ancient boulders, are literally jewels. Garnets that only form under immense pressure. The sort of pressure that's found when layers are crushed by the weight of millions of tons of rock on top of them.
The silver bullet clue is the garnet. These garnets are the key to understanding the amount of rock above us.
By analyzing the chemical structure of the garnet, in particular its calcium content, investigators can determine how much weight of rock was crushing down upon it at the moment it was made.
In simple terms, if you analyze the garnet and you see higher calcium content of the garnet, it means you're deeper into a mountain belt, more rocks above you. So we take these garnets back to the laboratory, we cut a very thin section, we put them under an electron microprobe, and the scientific result after this analysis is that we were 6 miles deep beneath the surface of the peaks, which were above us, and that's a long ways.
So, nearly 2 billion years ago, before the canyon evolved, ancient mountains 6 miles above sea level stood here, towering peaks as high as the modern Himalayas. Over the next 500 million years, these mountains were worn away by the relentless forces of erosion. Over millennia, the freezing and thawing of ice cracked open the rock of the mountain slopes. Wind and water carried the rock debris down towards the oceans, leaving behind a flat and featureless plain with no sign at all of a canyon.
Geologists learned to visualize the way that this place looked in the past. Knowing how to read the texture of the rock, the kind of rock it is, the fossils that are in it, geologists can, it's like a detective story. You can uncover what this place looked like billions of years ago.
This is now desert country, more than 300 miles inland. And yet, these shells, encased in solid rocks, are ocean fossils.
In this one cliff, you can find fossil shells that look like you'd pick up on the seashore today. They die, they fall to the bottom of the seafloor, and they get trapped and die in the mud at the bottom of the ocean at the time that they're being deposited.
Shells like these come from shallow tropical waters, an inland sea that first arrived here 500 million years ago and covered the flat, low-lying plain. But that did not happen just once. Many different layers in the walls of the Grand Canyon tell Karlstrom that over hundreds of millions of years, this land has been submerged by the sea, not just once, but at least 8 times. The last time this part of Arizona was under the sea was around 80 million years ago.
As we go higher in the layers in the Grand Canyon, we have different age seas which are depositing different kinds of rocks, different environments, different fossils that live at the different times. This chapter of seas coming in and seas going out is itself hundreds of millions of years.
Each sea deposited different types of material that hardened to become solid rock. Some sediment was sand that became buff-colored sandstone. Some was mud that hardened into darker shale, while the calcified remains of marine organisms were crushed into light-colored limestone. And yet, the dominant color is red. That comes from iron, locked within all the rocks. Over millions of years, the iron rusts into a distinctive red hue. For the geology detectives, descending into the Grand Canyon is like traveling back in time. The calcium content inside garnet gemstones reveals that nearly 2 billion years ago, mountains the size of Mount Everest stood where the Grand Canyon is now. Sea fossils exposed in the cliffs show that as late as 500 million years ago, the land was the muddy bottom of an ancient inland sea. The next puzzle for geologists is uncovering which awesome forces transformed that unremarkable flat land into this breathtaking natural wonder of the world. From 1.7 billion years ago to 70 million years ago, the landscape of western Arizona has undergone a series of extraordinary changes. Ancient mountains have given way to prehistoric seas, which have withdrawn to reveal a low-lying flat plain stretching as far as the eye can see. The magnificent gorge of the Grand Canyon does not yet exist. But over the next 20 million years, this landscape was to undergo immense changes that would create a unique high plateau and set the scene for the formation of the canyon. Ancient fossils of sea animals tell geologists that this land was once under the waves of an inland ocean. But that leads to yet another mystery. The investigation needs to figure out why these undersea rocks are now high in the air, thousands of feet above sea level.
It's surprising to go up a mile above sea level
and you find a clamshell or what looks like a clamshell, and you say, that's what I see when I go down to the ocean. So why is it here a mile above sea level?
It's clear that this region underwent a type of geological disturbance that pushed up the entire seabed. Geologists discovered in the 1960s that collisions between separate plates of the Earth's crust could force land up into the air. It happens all over the globe and usually deforms the land into tilted mountain ranges. But this Arizona uplift was unique.
After all the flat layers are deposited at sea level, there was a major uplift event called the Laramide orogeny, which lifted these rocks without tilting them, still flat, lifted them up to high elevation.
Because the land rose straight up, like being in an elevator, it formed a high, smooth plateau. The sea that had been there drained back toward the northeast. But as of yet, there was no Grand Canyon. The Colorado River, the force that cut the canyon from the rock, had yet to arrive.
Geologists from the very early days, from the late 1800s, are quite comfortable with the knowledge that the Colorado River has carved the Grand Canyon.
The high plateau was surrounded by even higher mountain ranges. New rivers began flowing from the mountains out across the plateau. It's essential for the investigation to establish when the Colorado River in particular arrived, because only then could it begin to carve the canyon. Until a few decades ago, some investigators offer scientists one of the most complete geological records on Earth.
The first concept you have to get your mind around as you're thinking about the Grand Canyon is that the stories told by the rocks are exceedingly old, millions and billions of years.
Karlstrom and his team are setting out on a grueling geology field trip along the Colorado River. It won't be an easy ride because this 1,450-mile-long river packs a punch. More than 800 million gallons of water can flow down the Colorado every hour. More water every second than the average U.S. household uses in a year. Karlstrom is investigating the ancient history of the land that was here before the Grand Canyon even existed. And for that, he needs to identify its oldest rocks. He is following in the footsteps of pioneer explorer John Wesley Powell. In 1869, he was the first man to successfully ride the Colorado through the entire length of the canyon.
All of us who work in the canyon as scientists admire John Wesley Powell immensely for his pioneer and scientific exploration of the Grand Canyon. And the questions that he framed are still questions that we work on today.
One of Powell's discoveries was these intimidating black rocks at the very base of the canyon.
Well, we're deep in the Grand Canyon, right by the Colorado River. You can see these spectacular black rocks. Actually, John Wesley Powell called them ugly black rocks because for him, these hard rocks made bad rapids, and that was harder on his trip. But for those of us who are interested in the early history of Grand Canyon, these rocks are the bonanza.
Powell had no way of dating these rocks, now identified as Vishnu schist. All he could conclude from their appearance was that they had once been molten, deep underground. But Karlstrom has an advantage: modern instruments that can accurately date the rocks by measuring radioactive decay. And the first step in figuring out what happened here in the ancient past is to record when these rocks were created.
These rocks are about 1.7 billion years old. It's less than half of the age of the Earth. So we have a great story here in the Grand Canyon of the last almost 2 billion years of Earth history.
But Karlstrom needs more information. And these ugly black rocks hold another crucial clue to what this land looked like before